And Dangerous Words is such a great title for this conference. And I think in the year 2016, you might assume that the most dangerous words you could utter would be words that are critical of Islam. And I think that's a fairly safe assumption. To be critical of Islam, or even unflattering, can result in death at the hands of the state, i.e. not the extreme fringe, but the law of the land, in numerous Islamic countries, including countries from which thousands upon thousands, if not millions, of people are now arriving in Europe. And punishment for insulting Islam has widespread support from Muslims around the world. The death penalty for leaving the faith, for example, has vast support across the Middle East and North Africa. In some countries that support is above 80%. In the UK, a Channel 4 poll a few years ago revealed that 78% of British Muslims believe that those exhibiting Muhammad cartoons should be criminally punished. We have writers butchered in Bangladesh, Christians jailed in Pakistan, bloggers lashed in Saudi Arabia. Vast swathes of the world, of the Muslim world, either by law or vigilantism, will not accept or tolerate the expression of anything which reflects badly on Islam. And the reasons for this are obvious. It's simply because critical, reasonable, or objective scrutiny could bring Islam crashing down. The threat of death or serious punishment is what gives Islam its power. It's what keeps its clerics in control. And without it, the imams would have nothing. It is only through imposition of Islam by force that it survives. And even Yusuf al-Qaradawi, a friend of the former mayor of London, a man of the Muslim Brotherhood, himself said that if the apostasy laws of Islam were abolished, Islam would cease to exist. So here we are in the 21st century. Reason, science, civil rights, free speech, and open discussion have created the most productive, civilized, freest, and economically prosperous region in the world. Things were going so well. But then we allowed mass migration from all over the world. No questions were asked as to belief, to culture, to compatibility. The globalists simply got their hands on our politicians and demanded that the doors be open. And the idea was that we were all supposed to come together. One people, one world. But Islam has refused to play along. Islam considers itself supreme and will afford no equality to those who hold other beliefs, to other cultures or peoples, and all are subject to the superior authority of Islam. Thanks to immigration and globalization, Europe is now beginning to resemble the Muslim world in many aspects, and nowhere more so than on the issue of free speech, or more specifically, the freedom to breach Sharia blasphemy laws. In Europe, insulting Islam can and does result in a person being fired from their job. In Europe, insulting Islam can and does result in a person facing criminal charges. Insulting Islam can and does result in murder and bloodshed. This is Europe in the 21st century. Post-Enlightenment secular democracies now have the brutal fist of Islam pounding on our right to speak. But here's the thing. This is the complication. We could assume that insulting Islam is actually the issue. But on any more detailed analysis of this, it isn't actually insulting Islam that is the problem. It's telling the truth about Islam. That is the reason for its prohibition both in the Islamic world and in Europe. And in order to persuade the people of Europe to allow mass migration from the Muslim world, it was necessary to convince the people of Europe that Islam was a religion of peace. And to do this, it was necessary to misrepresent its scriptures, to lie about the kind of societies it creates, and to disguise the brutal oppression that it inspires. And it is only by perfecting that facade that Islamic migration to the West can continue. Anything that exposes the truth of living with the influence of Islam is to be quashed, because the truth is the real enemy and the truth is the problem. George Orwell said that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 is 4. It is the most important freedom that we ought to possess, and it is one that we have lost. And how does one crush truth? One method is to pretend that it doesn't exist, that there's no such thing. And this is done by the transformation of objectivity into subjectivity. The objective truth replaced by perception or opinion, and everyone's opinion, of course, being equally valid. This piece of paper is white, and the ink on it is black. In the new subjective world, it's just an opinion that this piece of paper is white. I could easily say, in my opinion, this piece of paper is blue, and that opinion apparently is equally valid to the opinion that this piece of paper is white. In other words, there is no truth. There is no objective truth. In Britain, subjectivity is now part of our policing. The Macpherson inquiry, which was written after a racially motivated murder in London, featured recommendations on policing which were taken seriously, are still taken seriously, and are now formally a part of British policing. The definition of a racist incident was included in the Macpherson report, and it was, and I quote, "Any incident which is perceived to be racist by the victim or by any other person." Now, while this is in the courts of law subject to reasonableness, it can appoint a person as a racist, even if they had no racist intent whatsoever. The report also contained the following words, and I'll again quote it directly. "Colour-blind policing must be outlawed. The police must," I'll say that again, "colour-blind policing must be outlawed. The police must deliver a service which recognises the different experiences, perceptions, and needs of a diverse society. The result is that if you feel someone is a racist, or you feel that you are a victim, then that person is a racist, and you are a victim, regardless of what the objective truth actually is." Now, so insane is our deference to subjectivity that one can be born with white skin and declare themselves to be black. "I was born white, but I identify as black, therefore I am black." This is taken seriously. The objective truth is gone. And just as importantly, the objectivity of language has been undermined. The objectivity of language is really serious, and it's been undermined to disguise realities. Haitham al-Haddad is a British imam. He's a real charmer. He's a Sharia judge in the UK. Yes, we have Sharia judges in the UK. And he was asked by a Channel 4 reporter a few years ago whether or not a man may beat his wife under Sharia. Now, he knows perfectly well that this is the case. But rather than lie outright to a British audience, he got round the matter by saying that the word beat has several different meanings. It really does not. Beat means beat, and that's all it means. But you can bet that this worked. People will have relaxed. Oh, he doesn't mean beat in the way that we mean beat, so everything is okay. This works. People want this to be true, so they accept it as true. But he does mean beat in the way that we mean beat, because there is no other meaning for beat. Nowhere can the destruction of objective language be better observed than in the dishonest labels that are attached to those of us who speak negative truths about Islam. We are racists because we are declared to be, not because we are. We are fascists for the same reason. We are far right, etc. We are labelled these things not because they describe us accurately, but because the lunatic left, in its alliance with Islam, has decided that it has the right to define these terms, irrespective of any objectively understood meaning of those terms. So the truth, again, is irrelevant. But free speech matters so that we may tell the truth. That's why it's so important. And all over England, while thousands upon thousands of girls were being brutally gang raped by Muslim gangs, people didn't say so. They kept quiet. Those who did speak out lost their careers. And the truth was hidden for one reason only, which was not to cause offence to Muslims. And even though the consequence of this was continued mass rape, people would not risk the punishment involved in telling the truth about criminal behaviour by Muslims. And many of the rapists exploited this, playing the race card, to frighten the police into leaving them be, sometimes in the company of their underage victims. One girl told a journalist in the UK that she was with a gang of Muslim rapists when the police found them. They told the police that they were going to make a complaint for racial harassment, and the police left. The police left a young girl in the company of rapists because they didn't want to be accused of racism. Free speech is the backbone of democracy. And the reason is because it facilitates free and fair elections. You cannot have free elections if the candidate is not permitted to speak freely and the audience is not permitted to hear. And to deliberately distort the message of a political candidate by lying and mislabeling that candidate is to interrupt the democratic process and presenting falsities to voters. The lying and mislabeling and distortion of message is now mainstream in Europe. And in conclusion, the most dangerous words in Europe today are not words that insult Islam. They are the ones that tell the truth about Islam. Words that accurately describe objective reality are the great antagonist. War on words has therefore been declared. War on truth has been declared. Our language has been neutralized, so objective understanding is under threat. Objective reality itself is under threat, because reality is problematic when you're pursuing a fantasy. And globalists will allow nothing to interfere with their aim of open borders. They know that for globalism to work, different cultures must indulge in mutual respect. But Islam will not indulge in mutual respect. It demands adherence to its will. The United Nations, the ultimate symbol of world government, is also invested in the lie that Islam is peace, and to pull off this spectacular disguise, it has placed the most vile, brutal Islamic states in the world to sit on human rights bodies. The outcome of that is confusion and, of course, concealment of the truth. And while this goes on, people continue to be slaughtered and oppressed all over the world in the name of Islam. The West continues to keep its borders open to that religion's adherents. And to ease this process, it confronts not the slaughter or the oppression, but those of us who describe and criticize it. Words that portray Islam negatively are the enemy. The truth is the enemy. Reality is the enemy. And it's the enemy of those who seek to turn black into white and to turn Islam into peace. And I, with that, will stop, and I will ask for questions from you. Thank you very much for listening to me. Yes, I'm Marie Waters. Hi. I run an organisation in England called Sharia Watch UK. My website is shariawatch.org.uk. My own website is annemariewaters.org. I have a long and interesting political history. I used to be a member of the Labour Party in the UK. And I stayed in the Labour. Most common question I get about my years in the Labour Party is, why did you stay for so long? because I was saying the same things then that I'm saying now. I've been saying these for years. I wasn't a lefty back then. I was exactly as I am now. And the truth of it is, I thought that they didn't know. I thought that they didn't understand. Like most people, I think a lot of people just don't know about this. People are getting on with their lives, doing their jobs, paying their mortgages, raising their kids, and reading the mainstream media. They don't know about this. I thought it was the same in the Labour Party. When I realised that actually they do know, they understand perfectly, but they choose to ignore it for political gain. They didn't want votes drifting to their opponents, so they covered up rape. They allowed hundreds of thousands of English girls to be raped. Literally, they allowed it so that it wouldn't, the truth about it would afford votes to its opponents, basically, and it wanted to keep the votes. That is how corrupt it is. So upon the realization that they actually do know, they just don't care, that was when I left. And I now campaign about as much against them as I do against Islam. The left is an enormous, enormous part of this problem. They've allied themselves with Islam for very, very good reasons. They've got a lot in common. They're both totalitarian. They both love regulation, regulation, regulation. They're both big government. They're both socialists. You know, you hear an Islamist describe their perfect society, and it's massive government. I've heard even food, clothing, shelter provided by the state. They hate America. They hate Israel. They hate capitalism. This is a party for these people. This is Islam and the left goes together like strawberries and cream. So now I campaign against them every bit as much, and I can say with some passion that I now despise the Labour Party with an intensity that is only possible for someone who was once a part of it.
Xenophilia, the love of strangers.
Yeah, I've you know, it's really very interesting, and I might have to steal that phrase from you and use it. It's a very good one. Yeah, it's an interesting thing as well, xenophobia. I'm often accused of xenophobia, as if I'm afraid of difference. I'm not afraid of difference. I'm afraid of mutilation and rape and the oppression of women and the demands for censorship, and that's what we're afraid of. We're not afraid of difference. But it's such an interesting point that, yes, I do think people will they're not us, so they must be nice. There's this exotic, isn't it wonderfully exotic, that we have. No, it doesn't matter what they're doing. They might be mutilating their daughter, but isn't it lovely and exotic? So therefore it must, you're absolutely right. It is a love of all things different. But I think the love of all things different actually stems from a self-hate. They're not me, so they must be good. You know, there is a real self-hatred among the Western left. I wrote about it, actually, an article, the leftism is a mental illness. And I got into a bit of trouble over the headline, which I deliberately used because I thought I'll get into trouble for that, so use it. Yeah, you know, and then I talked about the left being a mixture of self-hatred and narcissism. And that is what it is. They're so important that they're responsible for everything. And they're so terrible that everything that's wrong is their fault. And everything being wrong is their fault is also narcissism. You know, they just love everyone that isn't them. And this is particularly true of white leftists. The anti-white sentiment you hear, even in the mainstream left, from white activists, is terrifying. They really hate themselves. You know, they believe that they are responsible. It's taken to great extremes of teaching that white history is simply one of oppression and colonialism. We didn't do anything but oppress. Nothing. You know, and particularly for Britain, you know, the only thing Britain ever did apparently was the British Empire. No, it wasn't. Well, great things came out of Britain, but you never hear about those. You only ever hear about the British Empire. And they lap it up. The left laps it up. They think that they will redeem themselves for something they haven't done by basically giving away their countries to strangers. This will redeem me of the guilt of colonialism, even though I had nothing to do with it. It's a mental illness. I'm sorry, it really is. That level of self-hatred and mixed with a level of self-importance is an extraordinary thing. And that's why I said you don't debate with these people. You can't. There's no getting through to that. You brush them aside and you talk to sane people.
I have a question here.
The J report, it's called. It's a report it was the first report into this. Professor Alexis J. She investigated just one town. It's not a city, it's a town in the north of England, and found that at least 1,400 girls in that one town alone had been gang raped over a 14-year period by Muslim gangs in this one town alone. Google the J report and you can read that full report. It details how and this is I'm emphasizing that this is in the J report so that it's not tabloid media, it's not me, it's not Islamophobes. This is in the J report, an official report for government, that police had arrested parents for trying to rescue their daughters. One father was arrested for breach of the peace when he had tried to take his daughter away from 4 rapists. It also details police arriving into grotty, filthy apartments with crowds of men and a young girl, and leaving her there with those crowds of men. It details police arresting victims themselves for complaining about rape. One 14-year-old girl told the police she had been repeatedly raped by these takeaways. These are these men who work and run these takeaways. She was drunk when she did it, so they arrested her for that. She was reporting that she was being repeatedly gang raped, and they arrested her. This is all in the J report. This is how sick and corrupt this whole situation is. And Rotherham has become the word to symbolize this. We say the word Rotherham, but actually what we mean is it's going on in every single town and city in England. And it's still exactly the same as it was prior to the Rotherham report. It's exactly the same.
It's a book called Easy Meat that you can read.
Yes, that's Easy Meat by Peter McLaughlin is the best book I've ever read on this.
Easy Meat.
Oh, Easy Meat.
Yeah. Now you have a question.
First off, congratulations on Brexit.
Oh,
Yeah.
I didn't do it, but thanks.
And in the light of Brexit, do you think there is a public uprising in Great Britain?
Brexit was, the night of Brexit, myself and my partner stayed up all night watching. And I still, the entire time I was campaigning for Brexit, I still assumed that Remain would win. I assumed it. There wasn't a moment I thought that Leave would win. But we did our best anyway. That was the kind of attitude, let's do our best. As the results were coming in, my chin was getting more and more to the floor when I realized actually Leave might win this. And we did. It is, what I immediately took from it is democracy is still alive. It is still alive. The British are still alive. They can still say, sod you. This was amazing. It was a middle finger to every single one of just the right kind of people. It was a middle finger to the left, who are still crying over it, still to this day, demanding a second referendum, screaming in the streets for let's ignore this referendum. They're still not over it, bless them. It's wonderful to watch. So it was the left, it was the mainstream media, the BBC. The BBC are still not over it either. They were going on and on for weeks afterwards about how Brexit has caused this and Brexit has caused that, and there was a storm last night, must be Brexit. It was just everything. The BBC blamed everything on Brexit. So it upset them. It upset, obviously, the EU. It upset the mainstream politicians in the UK. It upset the globalists. It upset the United Nations. It upset every single one of the right people. It was absolutely beautiful. And it showed that there's something still left in the British, that they got up and went out, and despite all the panic, we were immersed in it for months prior. The world's going to end. You're all going to be living on the streets. Everyone just still went out and did it. So the answer to your question is yes. There's something still there. the British will continue to fight this, I think. It also gave a bit of a boost. It gave confidence to people who thought it was over, who thought, you know what, this is it. What can we do? We live in a globalized world now. We're part of this corrupt EU. And now that's gone. Because now they know that's not actually the case. And if we can do that, we can do anything. The vote still works. So yes, and I'm delighted about it. I was talking about, if we get to that point, to the doomsday scenario at the end of your point, we would probably have no choice but to somehow rise up in violence. I have only, there was the Second Amendment of the American Constitution has only really been something I've thought about quite recently, that I've only really understood it and understood the importance of it. And I think that's partly what's wrong with the British on this issue. British are not used to guns. We're not a gun people. Even our police don't have guns, and it's quite a quaint thing. The English bobby, a bobby is a policeman. The English bobby with his truncheon, and we're not used to guns. Guns is not a British thing. So it'd be very difficult for a British politician to argue that we ought to be armed. I don't think Britain is quite ready for such a thing. But I do really understand that the importance of the US Second Amendment, we saw with Rotherham, we saw a perfect example with the gang rapes that were going on. We have to wait for the state to protect us. That is the position that Britain is in. Either the state protects us or we're not protected. And the state is not protecting us. That is the situation that we're in. Are we ready to say we want guns? I don't think we are. Again, in the doomsday scenario that you paint, where the totalitarian state has just gone so far that there's no choice but to rise up in violence, I don't want it to happen, but I think it could. But as a political point, I don't think it would quite work now, at least, with the British to say we ought to have guns. I don't think it's something that the British people really want. They want the state to do what it's supposed to do, and it isn't, and it won't. But it's only through the gang rapes and through Rotherham that I've realised quite how vulnerable one is, not just us, but how vulnerable a people is if you depend on the state to protect you, and it doesn't. You are incredibly, incredibly vulnerable, and I think we have to start at some point addressing the issue of self-defense. But in Britain, it's something that's going to have to be done slowly. We just don't have that gun culture, that gun identification with guns that you do in the US. And I think it would be a very difficult political thing to do. But I do think we at least need to start sowing the seeds in Britain of what on earth, the state is not protecting us. What are we going to do to protect ourselves? I think that's dip our toe in the water at the moment. But we just don't have that identification with guns in Britain. It's left us sitting ducks, I agree.